I'm about to spend 1 month playing Rimworld inside of Kenshi to see how it compares to the real game. Right off the bat, we're going to play the normal Rimworld start. You start off with $1,000 and you're given 3 people who've all been awakened by the sounds of sirens and ripping metal and barely made it out alive, beginning our journey into Rimworld in Kenshi. Now, to properly compare these two, I'll need a test control group, which would be a real normal playthrough of Rimworld. In this case, I'll be using Rat Knight's video on surviving in vanilla Rimworld for 100 days. Now I know, right off the bat, you're probably asking yourself, why am I only doing a month if we're talking about 100 days in Rimworld? And that's actually because the time ticks down differently in Kenshi, and 1 Kenshi day is about 3 Rimworld days. So to see how it compares, I've set some Rimworld goals for myself that I want to recreate in Kenshi by the end of the video. Build a house and a bed, build a farm, recruit a prisoner, build a kitchen, research alien technologies, trade with fellow settlers, amputate a soldier, and finally, fight a boss. Of course, some of these tasks are going to be harder than others to recreate in Kenshi. For example, it's not Minecraft. We can't just go around punching trees and rocks to get resources. We might be lucky enough to spawn near some, but more often you have to move your base closer to where the resources are. On the other hand though, some things in Kenshi are much easier than they are in Rimworld, because our cryopod landed literally just outside of a bustling Hiver town with a trader and plenty of villagers. Meaning that the beginning of our playthrough would probably rely mostly on trade, which is kind of the opposite of Rimworld, where trading usually takes place later because traveling can take days to complete and isn't exactly easy. With that being said, our first objective was to trade with the fellow settlers. Using the $1,000 we were gracefully given, I opted to buy some building materials and focus on setting up a house first. Now, this isn't typically the way that I would play Kenshi, since usually building a house just means that bandits are more likely to attack you, but building a house is pretty much step 1 in Rimworld, so here we are. And when I say here we are, what I actually mean is right here, in the heart of Vane. Not a place I would typically build my home, but considering that this is where our pod landed and all the regions around us are full of racists, I think that's the right thing to do. And after only a single hour of hard labor on our first day here on Earth, we already had 4 walls and a roof. You see what I mean about time passing a little slower in Kenshi? Unfortunately, right now this is all we're limited to, because despite building the entire shed, which consists of 4 walls, we technically still don't know how to build walls. This means we need to get started on our second goal right away of researching alien technology. Building these walls would require more building materials though, and I can't keep on getting price gouged at the local market. So we're gonna have to take things into our own hands.
This is a crafting table. You place these elements and
That is, until a fucking albino gorilla chases you out of your own house, which is the one downside of playing Kenshi instead of Rimworld. Fighting a maddened weasel is not quite the same as fighting an entire gorilla, or 7 beak things that broke into your home. So, after taking refuge in the nearby village and totally not being scared, we went back to mining, only to be attacked by the gorilla again. This time we took refuge in our small shack, which seemed to be enough to keep him at bay. Aside from that though, our neighbors really weren't that bad. Just a colony full of bug people and the occasional starving refugees that passed by. But by day 2, I was already realizing that we weren't much further away from being the bunch of starving refugees walking around ourselves. So I pivoted to mining copper for money, trade with the local merchant in exchange for the knowledge of the gods, aka an old stinky algebra book. But an algebra book that would let us build walls, and hopefully even a farm later. So while I let Ponytail here learn the magic ways of the world, we continue to mine copper and pay the bills, avoiding the occasional albino gorillas every now and then as they came, except for the one that I accidentally locked inside of my house with us. Not my greatest move. But all the more reason why I put an emphasis on learning how to build walls as soon as possible. But my walls must have been getting attention, because in the middle of building them, we were stopped by a friendly farm trader who gave us the gift of cactus and wheat, meaning that we would be able to research our own farm very soon. And as the night of the 3rd day passed and entered the 4th, I found myself feeling pretty proud of what we'd accomplished so far, and ended up finishing the wall another day later. On day 6, I made the trade of hard cold copper in exchange for the dry dead luxury that is wheat, which we could finally plant thanks to our research. This also meant that we had accomplished yet another one of our objectives for this playthrough. However, the one downside of a farm is that it still takes a long time for this stuff to grow, and we decided to pass the time by watching the starving vagrants take on a gorilla by themselves. Obviously, this was a horrible idea for them, but for me, it just meant I had a chance to steal the clothes off their cold dead backs. Now you might be thinking to yourself, a full base complete with defensive walls, a wheat farm, even high quality industrial machines forged from metal plates. Surely this guy has already built a bed. Well, you're wrong. Beds are much more complicated than any of this apparently, and the local merchant wasn't exactly being helpful since he doesn't even sell sleeping bags, meaning we were reduced to building them ourselves, which meant even more alien technology. On day 9, I went out looking for iron deposits nearby, found out there were absolutely none, and then watched a boxing match between 20 bugs and a literal dinosaur. After that, we spent the night over the fire and cooked our first ever real meal. In the meantime, our wheat was finally done growing. And I also realized while he was farming the wheat that the Rimworld clothes textures were just cutting his body in half. I'm sure that's fine and probably not an issue for his internal organs at all. On day 12, we finally became intelligent enough to craft a bed and move up from the squalor that we were living in. Granted, 12 days might not sound like a lot of time, but keep in mind that this is already like a month of Rimworld time, and we just built our first bed. Meaning the only way that I was going to be able to keep up with the pace of the Rimworld campaign was to focus on yet another one of our objectives, wrangling a prisoner to join the squad. Of course, this meant I would have to actually build a prison first, which is why I built this horrible shack in the corner of the base and began to research torture methods, ways to house them. So after researching these prisoner cages, perfectly comfortable quarters, another 2 days had passed. During this time, I focused on another goal of ours, which was building a kitchen. Now, it may not look like much of a kitchen to you, but I promise it is. This right here is a big-ass blender, and that's an oven. I'm pretty sure that's all you need in a kitchen for it to count, as long as all you want is protein smoothies and brick-fired pizzas. Anyways, with our kitchen and prison in full development, it was finally time to go catch ourselves a prisoner. Now, I didn't want to attack any of the nearby neighbors and imprison them because they're the ones that are trading with us, and they definitely know what we look like. Thus, we began our first ever real journey to another place. On the way, we discovered a new species of animal, which also tried to kill us just like the rest of them, and met an entirely new race of people, who immediately referred to us as Flappy Flatskins, which was also my nickname in high school. Now, once we were inside, I got pretty excited because someone immediately greeted us and was looking for a warrior, the perfect kind of person to bring onto our squad. But he cost a whopping $7,500, which was a little outside of my budget for a prisoner. I quickly realized that what I was looking for simply wasn't gonna be here. Even if it was a beautiful town, it wasn't housing the kind of scoundrels that I needed, only Shek warriors. So I tried to visit another nearby town, which looked equally promising, but as I approached the gate, I realized we were dealing with the same people, and unfortunately, we just had to head back home and give up the chase. Now on the bright side, we did acquire some sick backpacks, which meant we were about to double our copper increase, if not triple or quadruple it, to the local trader, meaning our profits were about to go through the roof. Now, we could hobble over 200 pounds of copper at a time and offload it for a whopping 10 grand each time, meaning that those prisoners weren't looking so expensive anymore. The only downside was that we still weren't really able to find any prisoners. There's like 10 Hyver villages around us and a bunch of Shek that we can't recruit. And unfortunately, we can't really go to the north unless I want to get eaten alive by a mixture of cannibals and fogmen, meaning my only option was Okron. A pretty long journey to make, no doubt, but at least I wouldn't feel bad about chaining up some racist zealots and letting them rot in our prison. Thankfully, I'm a white man, which means I have the power of their god on my side, and they let me in with no issues. Once I was in, I went straight away to the first bar I could find to look for the sorry sap that I was going to bring home with me. But it was absolutely fucking empty. Thankfully though, this is the Lord's land, which means of course there's like 4 bars. Except the second bar also had nobody in it. The only guy in here was the bartender, who immediately was catching on to my unusual looks and wondering if I had a copy of their Bible with me. I quickly bought it off of him so I could blend in and avoid any more questions down the line, and then waited outside for my next victim. Eventually, dawn broke, and a tired, beat-up group of mercenaries entered the bar. They were perfect. With their flesh-colored leather jackets and their George Washington pointy tricorn hats, they would make the perfect prisoners. So I made a simple exchange of 2,000 gold for the petty souls of 10 unknowingly trafficked strangers who had an unhealthy fate ahead of them. It took them almost a whole day to walk back to the base, But eventually they showed up and entered, pledging their everlasting allegiance to us, which would soon be reinforced by metal bars. If I were to fight these people normally and capture them myself, I'd probably get my ass kicked. But as my ally, they have no choice but to let me pick them up and do what I wish with them, meaning that pretty soon we'd have our own prisoners to recruit. However, I did also purchase some people legally with their consent because I was pretty desperate for bodies at this point. One of which was the legendary NPC Bard, a unique NPC who's capable of singing songs and reciting ballads as you cross the lands of Kenshi. Although we would need to cross them a little faster than this because there was a raid of cannibals on their way to our base already. Thankfully, by the time we actually showed up, it looked like our dinosaur friends had already made short work of them, meaning there wasn't much else for us to do or a purpose to keep our mercenaries around. It was time to put them all in air jail while we waited for the real prison to get built. Eventually, I transferred them over to the human trafficking container, where they remained for the next couple days while we researched basically everything we possibly could. However, by day 20, our first ever mercenary was ready to negotiate a price for her freedom. A simple exchange of 10,000 cats meant that not only did we have our first armed warrior, but we were able to check off yet another goal of recreating Rimworld in Kenshi. Unfortunately, a day later, we were greeted by the rest of the cannibals who had somehow survived my guard beak things and started breaking down our front door. During the battle, they cut off Gref's leg, something that would normally trouble me, but I was quickly taken away by the fact that this was not just any regular cannibal. This was the leader of the Canhead Exiles, the mighty Canhead, a man with a bounty of 20,000 cats, wanted in every faction that surrounded us, which, if you're any good at math, means 2 more mercenaries. So, I quickly picked him up and imprisoned him to sell later. Afterwards, I reconciled with the rest of my crew when I was reminded of Gref's missing leg, which actually offered us a wonderful opportunity to complete yet another goal. So, after dropping on down to the local robotic bug mart and picking up a fresh piece of metal with a round bowl at the top, I shoved it into his missing leg and set him on his way. On day 22, I decided it was finally time to cash in on our bounty and turn in the Cannibal King. So I marched all the way from our base to the Shek's front door, and like the snitch I am, I ran him to the nearest police station I could find and traded him in for cold hard cash. Oh, and I also got to watch him get tied to a wooden pole, which was fun. Back home, we recruited yet another mercenary. We also took the time to improve our base walls to tier 2, build crossbows on top of them, and finally have some proper defenses in place in case any of those cannibals decided to come back. So after feeling pretty safe and secure in our surroundings, we began the cycle of mining copper, trading with the local merchants, and recruiting prisoners, until eventually we approached day 28, where I sold my last batch of copper and brought us up to $50,000. The money was no longer any good for recruiting prisoners, but instead was part of a bigger plan. Just like any good game, the whole point is to hopefully one day take on an extremely powerful boss. And now it was finally time to do just that. Due to our geographical position and our relative weakness, the best chance we have at defeating a boss in this game would be to take on the Bugmaster. A man, a myth, and quite literally a legend, the Bugmaster is known for commanding all spiders and bugs across the lands of Kenshi. A foe so formidable that he's demolished entire cities. And just before his region sits 2 cities, properly named the Last Stand, which serve as a final checkpoint to keep his control over the lands contained to the southern region. This would also be the place where we spent all 50,000 of our gold on armor and weapons to prepare ourselves to take him on. A death wish for sure, but one I wanted to be part of nonetheless. So, as we moved further into Iraq and came closer to the Bugmaster, it became even more evident just how dangerous he was going to be. We passed through ruins of lost cities taken over by his creatures and ran past frontline defenses of mercenaries who'd been hired to keep him and his bugs at bay, armed with crossbows at the ready, something that we didn't carry. And as we approached the rim of his crater, we were reminded that very few people had ever even been here to witness the insect god himself, much less return afterwards, with the game once again warning us to turn around and give up. Despite that, we decided to push on and continue our journey. If we were lucky enough to avoid the eyes of the spiders, we could use our genetic advantage of swimming to close in on the Bugmaster's location. A very obvious spiraling tower out here in the middle of nowhere, which we quickly pushed through and climbed up. Now, admittedly, I knew we had almost no chance of taking this man down due to his huge bug army of quite literally hundreds of spiders, but I thought maybe, just maybe if I could get close enough to him, we could at least take him with us. Unfortunately, try as we might, it ended up being futile. The man was simply too strong, and he pretty easily overpowered us. In fact, he even strikes some of us down with a single blow. Now, I probably could have cheesed this a little bit more and cheated, or used the Gorillo to train up my stats earlier in the game, but at the end of the day, we came here to simulate Rimworld, and I think we did that successfully. I should mention as well that this is only possible thanks to Mops is Gone, who created the 3D Rimworld mod. 100 days of playing Rimworld converted to a simple month in Kenshi. Starting off small with a simple shack, we eventually built ourselves a home and a bed with a bustling farm outside and a prisoner shack. We also researched our alien technologies, traded with the fellow settlers, and amputated one of our own. Ultimately, though, he became a sacrifice at the hands of the Bugmaster. And as such, the Bugmaster brought an end to our 30 days of Rimworld in Kenshi.